Shalom, family. May the weeks ahead be blessed beyond measure, full of Yahweh's Ruach. Let's begin by the blowing of the shofar and an opening prayer. Yahweh, we come together to proclaim your name, your set-apart days, and your sovereign kingdom. May all who are listening receive tremendous revelations all the days of their lives here on earth. Prepare us for the times ahead. Thank you for inviting us into your family. In Yahushua HaMashiach, so shall it be for all who are tuning in. To start, let's jump right into the scriptures in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verses 15 to 16. So the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verses 15 to 16. And just so you know, there will be quite a few passages and dates mentioned throughout this teaching tonight. And as always, it's encouraged to take note of them because they are extremely important, and it will also help you grow with and in Yahweh as you receive His word, His truth, and in spirit. So Leviticus chapter 23 verses 15 to 16 says, "From the day after the day of rest, that is the day you bring the sheaf for waving, you are to count 7 full weeks until the day after the 7th week. You are to count 50 days. And then you are to present a new grain offering to Yahweh." If you have a notepad and would like to write these down, as mentioned, they are super beneficial because there's a lot of information that we will be receiving from these passages and connecting them throughout the way. But as you know, we just finished honoring a few of Yahweh's feasts. So Pesach, unleavened bread, and first fruits. Praise Yahweh, because it is a massive blessing to take part in His appointed days. Now, according to scripture and what we just read, after the day of the Shabbat, on the Feast of First Fruits, we are to count 7 full weeks. 49 days is a total of 7 weeks, right? But in the passage that we read in verse 16, it notes to highlight the following day, the 50th day. So 7 weeks from the Feast of First Fruits, and the day after, the 50th, will be the Feast of Shavuot, or in English, the Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Shavuot will occur from sunset Tuesday, June 11th, to sunset Thursday, June 13th. So from June 11th to the 13th, we are to observe, proclaim, and honor the Feast of Weeks. However, there is a preparation period, a duration of 7 weeks, before we are to honor the Feast of Shavuot. And from the last week's feast to this week, we have 5 more weeks to prepare. There is a reason for everything Yahweh organized. Pesach, unleavened bread, and first fruits. And of course, Shabbat. With the help of Yahweh, we are able to taste and experience living a righteous life in Yahushua for 8 days and all the days of our life since the moment we decided to receive salvation in Yahweh. The feasts are not only extremely important, but they are also tests. Tests to see how you live your life and how you should respond to certain tests and temptations. Because we should be living righteously every single day in Yahweh, not falling back to who we were before. Just because a feast is not present doesn't mean you stop living righteously. You continue living righteously with the help of Ruach Yahweh. Take this into account every single day of your life. like during the feast we just observed, because living in Yahweh means you should be living life as if, and it is, the ultimate feast, the ultimate celebration, the joy you should have with you at all times. The fruits of Yahweh should be present within you in all the days of your life here on earth, because you have been made new in Yahweh and you are now part of his sovereign kingdom. Think about what you realized, what you were told by Yahweh, experienced or understood during the last couple of weeks. Maybe there was an awareness of how you started your days, how you planned your days, what you did in the evenings, what you stopped doing, avoided, and prevented. Can you see the little details in your life that are not righteous in Yahweh? What are those details? Do you see them as blessings or curses? Do they bring you back to your old identity that is wicked and from a cursed seed? Or did you seek Yahweh's help from his Ruach when you were and are being tested and tempted to fall back? You need to realize walking with Yahweh requires daily actions to be taken. It should truly become your lifestyle. There is no other way to do life without being in direct and constant communion with Yahweh. To be overwhelmed with his complete shalom, wholeness, everything being satisfied and overflowed with his goodness, is a gift his children should be experiencing every single day. And until you realize that, the battles in your life will always be a struggle and a continual cycle to teach you how to grow and mature. Once you reach maturity in the area of your life that Yahweh is having you work in, when a roadblock is headed your way, your faith, your hope, and love in Yahweh won't be wavered or diminished, because you were able to build a strong foundation with and in Yahweh alone. Take note, Yahweh will help you. He's there to help you. You have been blessed with his Ruach, Yahweh's breath, Yahweh's spirit, and Yahweh's wind. Speak and exercise his resources, his words, what he is telling you to do and say. And his Ruach will become magnified in your life, especially when the tests and temptations arise. Each time you are able to overcome and experience freedom from those tests and temptations, the traps of life, your identity in Yahweh becomes solidified and confirmed. That hurdle becomes one of your many testimonies, because you were able to overcome with Yahweh's goodness and faithfulness. And Yahweh will then put you in the position to receive more, bless others more often, be responsible for more, have more in all the areas of your life to be blessed by Yahweh and to be used to be a blessing to others, because you have shown yourself to be faithful in the desert. Now remember, we follow the Hebrew calendar, so mark your calendars, because Yahweh has been helping you to prepare for the Feast of Weeks since the Feast of Pesach, since it had begun. So yes, that is correct. You heard that right. The Feast of Pesach and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Shabbat, and the Feast of First Fruits, and the upcoming Feast of Shavuot are all connected. And these are just the first portions of the feasts in Yahweh we are to observe. We have yet to reach and to teach on the second portion of Yahweh's feasts, as that's later in the year. Regardless, every single one of Yahweh's feasts are connected and has a lot of treasure for you to discover. Learn about them individually together, fellowship with one another. Seek Yahweh's wisdom so you are aware you're helping one another, your brothers and sisters. Be prepared for what's to come, and take action to receive the transformations and blessings coming up ahead. With that being said, the Feast of Shavuot, if you don't realize, is a very significant and special for the children in Yahweh. Many in the Christian religion, especially since we came from the Christian religion, refer to it as the day of Pentecost, the day when the disciples received the gift of speaking in other tongues or languages. And the word Pentecost is actually a Greek word for 50. Nevertheless, the Feast of Shavuot is called the Feast of Weeks for a reason. We need to receive the fullness of Yahweh's truth and his messages to us, not from mankind. So, 1, Yahweh declared his and these appointed times and their names, such as the Feast of Weeks, for reasons we are able to become aware of, and for reasons we may also never know of, because only Yahweh knows everything. 2, in the first Pesach, referred in the book of Shema or Exodus, the Hebrews were delivered and freed from natural and spiritual slavery, bondage, wickedness, idolatry, and many more. Remember this, that despite the Hebrews being in a position of poverty and slavery in the world's eyes and economy, Yahweh's hand was always providing for them with continual provisions, blessings, protection, miracles, and favor unlike any other. Yahweh instructed Moshe and Aaron in Shema chapter 12, his appointed times in each year the followers of Yahweh are to honor and remember. The next thing I want to point out is the duration from Yahweh mentioning to Moshe and Aaron in Shema chapter 12 regarding the deliverance and freedom the Hebrews have been granted until the moment they arrived at Mount Sinai and received the 10 statements, which is the word used in Hebrew, or commandments, was 7 weeks and 1 day. Yahweh took the Hebrews on a 7-week preparation journey from the moment they were given a glimpse of the blessing ahead, which is the promised land. And on the 50th day, Yahweh appeared to Moshe on Mount Sinai to give the 10 statements. Of course, if you don't already know, the older generations did not reach the promised land. So you can see here how there are phases or levels to each blessing. Now, if you turn your books to Shemot or Exodus chapter 12, we'll be reading verses 48 to 51. So the book of Shemot chapter 12 verses 48 to 51 says, "If a foreigner staying with you wants to observe Yahweh's Pesach, all his males must be circumcised. Then he may take part and observe it. He will be like a citizen of the land, but no uncircumcised person is to eat it. The same teaching is to apply equally to the citizen and to the foreigner living among you." All the people of Israel did just as Yahweh had ordered Moshe and Aaron. On that very day, Yahweh brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their divisions. Now turn to still in the book of Shemot, but chapter 19, verse 1. So still in the book of Shemot or Exodus, chapter 19, verse 1. "In the 3rd month after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the Sinai desert." Now we will read in the same chapter 19, verses 3 to 6. Moshe went up to Yahweh, and Yahweh called to him from the mountain. Here is what you are to say to the household of Yaakov, to tell the people of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you will be a kingdom of Kohanim, or kingdom of priests, for me, a nation set apart. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. Now go down to verses 9 to 11. Yahweh said to Moshe, see, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, so that the people will be able to hear when I speak with you, and also to trust in you forever. Moshe had told Yahweh what the people had said. So Yahweh said to Moshe, go to the people today and tomorrow, separate them for me by having them wash their clothing and prepare for the third day. For on the third day, Yahweh will come down on Mount Sinai before the eyes of all the people. Now go down to verses 13 and we'll read up to 19. No hand is to touch him, for he must be stoned or shot by arrows. Neither animal nor human will be allowed to live. When the shofar sounds, they may go up on the mountain. Moshe went down from the mountain to the people and separated the people for Yahweh, and they washed their clothing. He said to the people, prepare for the third day, don't approach a woman. So, just in case you understand really quickly, intimacy among mankind during preparation periods, such as the third day, was prohibited. Why? It's an act of purifying, cleansing, fasting, readying oneself, to receive the blessings from Yahweh and communion with Yahweh. Fasting from anything is not for the natural. It is from Yahweh, and fasting is a spiritual act. And when one is to fast, it should be to focus on Yahweh alone. But let's continue reading verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was a thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud on the mountain. Then a shofar blast sounded so loudly that all the people in the camp trembled. Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet Yahweh. They stood near the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was enveloped in smoke because Yahweh descended onto it in fire. Its smoke went up like the smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder, Moshe spoke, and Yahweh answered him with a voice. So we can see here, during the first feast of Shavuot, Yahweh appeared to the Hebrews on Mount Sinai. We read earlier how when Yahweh mentioned their time of freedom that occurred in the first month, now we just read about how Yahweh appeared to them in the third month. Think of the time frame and how you are to prepare for the coming feasts. Also, in the later scriptures during Yahushua's time, he told the Talmudim, or students, about the beautiful blessing ahead, in which they had to also prepare for. So turn your books to Acts chapter 1, and I encourage you to also take note to reference later on when you do Bible study with Yahweh individually, Acts chapter 1 to 2. It is extremely helpful, especially with the upcoming feasts and the preparation weeks. And also, as you read and listen to these chapters, It will help you gain more insight to the events that took place during the feast of Yahweh. And something you should also know, that the writer of this book was Luke. He was a Gentile. He was not part of the 12 students of Yahushua, but understand that while Yahushua and his 12 students were fellowshipping and sharing the messages to many people from many nations became followers in Yahushua. They received salvation in Yahweh. So the first passages we will read in the book of Acts in chapter 1 is verses 1 to 8. In the first book, I wrote about everything Yahushua set out to do and teach, until the day when, after giving instructions through the Ruach HaKodesh to the emissaries whom he had chosen, he was taken up into heaven. After his death, he showed himself to them and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. During a period of 40 days, they saw him, and he spoke with them about the kingdom of Yahweh. At one of these gatherings, he instructed them not to leave Jerusalem, but to wait for what the Father promised, which you heard about from me. For Yahuchanan used to immerse people in water, but in a few days you will be immersed in the Ruach HaKodesh. When they were together, they asked him, Sovereign King, are you at this time going to restore self-rule to Israel? He answered, You don't need to know the dates or the times. The Father has kept these under his own authority. But you will receive power when the Ruach HaKodesh comes upon you. You will be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and all of Judea and Shimron, indeed to the ends of the earth. Can you just imagine for one brief moment? Yahushua was raised on the Feast of First Fruits. He appeared and fellowshipped with his followers for 40 days from the time he was raised. Yahushua revealed to the followers the Ruach HaKodesh, Ruach Yahweh, the Ruach of Yahweh, his breath, his spirit, and wind of Yahushua, and they were able to experience that during the preparation weeks leading up to the Feast of Shavuot. They were communing with Yahweh. For 3 days, they also had prepared to witness his words come to pass. On the 3rd day, he will be raised. In the book of John, chapter 2, Yahushua said to the people at the temple to destroy it, and in 3 days, he will raise it again. Do you believe that Yahushua is alive? Do you believe that his words and promises will come to fruition in your life? If you do, how about your ability to exercise his fruits during the waiting period? Is Yahweh the gardener in your life? Let's continue reading verses 12 to 5 in the book of Acts, chapter 1. So Acts chapter 1, verses 12 to 15. It says, Then they returned to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which is near Jerusalem, a Shabbat day's journey. When they had entered, they went up to the upper room where they were staying, Peter and John and Jacob and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Jacob son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judah son of Jacob. All these with one mind were continuing together in prayer. I want to repeat that really quick. Verse 14. All these with one mind were continuing together in prayer, along with the woman and Miriam, Yahushua's mother, and his brothers. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers and sisters. The number of names altogether was about 120, and said, Think for a moment, what were the followers of Yahushua doing during the waiting period? Were they anxious, tired of waiting? Did they just leave Jerusalem because they didn't believe in Yahweh's words? Or were they fellowshipping with one another, communing with Yahweh, praying together, helping each other grow and mature in Yahweh? Now think about what you are doing now. What do you plan to do during this waiting period? What has Yahweh instructed you to apply? We have to understand that we have the means and the blessing to learn from other people, from stories, from the messages Yahweh authored for us to receive one day. The journey and experiences in the scriptures may look nothing like yours, but that doesn't matter, because in Yahweh, in His truth, in His words, through His Ruach, you are able to receive tremendous wisdom and knowledge through the messages written, and through His Ruach, who can speak to you clearly if you only listen to His voice. And if you have humility to also seek Him for His help and His path for your life. Another thing to realize is how there were 120 names gathered together during this waiting period of Shavuot. 120, the numerical significance is understanding how there were 12 tribes of Israel, 12 students of Yahushua, 12 gates and foundations are in the New Jerusalem. And there are many other references throughout scripture about the number 12. But why 120? Why was that specified? The number times 12, what number times 12 equates to 120? 10. It's 10. So 10 times 12 is 120, right? There were 10 utterances or 10 statements that Yahweh spoke during the times and days of creation. In Bereshit chapter 1, Yahweh spoke and said 10 utterances during the days of creation. When Yahweh spoke life into what became dark, full of chaos, and full of void, He brought life. He spoke life. He breathed life. Yahweh also spoke and gave 10 statements for us all to follow. The tithe, meaning tenth, the 10% of all your increase, belongs to Yahweh. Let me repeat that again. The tithe, meaning tenth, the 10% of all your increase, belongs to Yahweh. We are not giving. A lot of churches, organizations, and religions like to say, give what you can, give back to the church, give even $1. It doesn't matter how much you give. We're not giving anything because it doesn't belong to us. The 10%, the tithe, belongs to Yahweh, so we're returning the 10%. Another portion I want to mention is how Yahushua was with His followers for 40 days leading up to the feast of Shavuot. Meaning they had 10 days of Him not being present in the natural aspect. And from Adam to Noah, there were 10 generations. From Noah to Abraham, there were also 10 generations. Also, the 12th Hebrew letter in their alphabet, Lamed, which has a numerical value of 30, and the meaning is to teach and learn symbolically. And Yahushua started His public ministry at what age? The last reference I will mention is how there were 10 plagues against the Egyptians. Are you receiving anything? Are you recognizing anything? Is Yahweh revealing to you anything? Do you see the connections? What does the number 12 and 10 signify? You need to realize there is meaning in everything. When you read scripture, you need to read it. You need to listen to it. Don't just follow religion and aim to finish the Bible in 1 year. There's no race to finish the scriptures. What will you gain if your motives are self-focused rather than doing things to give him glory and grow your relationship in him? I want to mention how the number 10 represents divine completion and order. It is also the first letter in Yahweh's name. YHWH. YHWH is the number 10. Has a numerical value of 10. The pictograph script for the letter YHWH is an arm or a hand. This letter is also in every Hebrew letter. Although the Egyptians experienced curses from Yahweh, he blessed and did 10 miracles for his children during the times of chaos, darkness, and void affecting the Egyptians with a hard heart. Lastly, this is a natural connection for you to see it in another way. But you need to realize that you have 10 fingers and 10 toes. There is something extremely valuable in the number 10. And it's literally able to be seen every single day in your life as you look to Yahweh and acknowledge that he is the creator of all life and all things. Now, as for the number 12, it represents literal completeness and the fullness of Yahweh in all things. A few natural connections you can make is how we have 12 joints in our fingers and toes. We also have 12 vertebrae responsible for the structure, support, and protection to our organs. And we have 12 cranial nerves, which are there to allow our body to function properly. Think of all of your senses: how you see, how you move, how you speak, how you can taste things, how you can hear, how you express yourself, and many more. What you see and do in life, according to bringing it to Yahweh and honoring him, everything is amazingly beautiful, powerful, and meaningful when you do that with him, when you do life with Yahweh. So let's turn to, still in the book of Acts, but chapter 2 this time. So the book of Acts, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, we will be reading. So the book of Acts, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. The festival of Shavuot arrived, and the believers all gathered together in one place. Suddenly, there came a sound from the sky like the roar of a violent wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then they saw what looked like tongues of fire, which separated and came to rest on each of them. They were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak or to talk in different languages, as the Spirit enabled them to speak. Now they were staying in Jerusalem, religious Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard this sound, a crowd gathered. They were confused because each one heard the believers speaking in his own language. Totally amazed, they asked, "How is this possible? Aren't all these people who are speaking from Galilee? How is it that we hear them speaking in our native languages? We are Parthians, Medes, Elamites, people from Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, the province of Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the areas of Libya around Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs. How is it that we hear them speaking in our own languages about the great things Yahweh has done? Now notice how Yahweh's Ruach appeared to mankind in a similar way to how he appeared to mankind in the first Shavuot at Mount Sinai. Instead of the followers preparing their clothing, they focused on fellowship and prayer. Another thing to realize is how the 120 followers of Yahushua began to speak in other languages, meaning the claim many religious organizations take pride in, how they were the first church, how their theology and doctrines are the messages with all authority. Do not be fooled. These 120 followers consisted of both Hebrews by blood and those grafted, meaning people whose ancestors who were from other nations, tribes, former pagan worshipers, they decided to follow Yahweh and receive the blessing of salvation through Yahushua. So if you are a follower of Yahweh, and you become a child in him with a new seed and identity, and you left your old life that was dead and full of curses, you become a spiritual Hebrew, just like Abraham. You crossed over to the path to be in communion with Yahweh. You left your past life and identity for good to follow Yahweh and partake in the promised land, receiving the tree of life and its fruits and all the promises that comes with it. The word Hebrew means to literally cross over or to pass through. If you received Yahweh into your life as him being your father and the sovereign king and creator of all, you get to pass through on the day of judgment and be received into his eternal kingdom. The wicked don't get to cross over or pass through Yahushua because they will be dismissed and removed and completely diminished. Let's continue reading still in the book of Acts chapter 2, but verses 37 to 47. So in the book of Acts chapter 2, verses 37 to 47. It says, "On hearing this, they were stung in their hearts, and they said to Kepha and the other emissaries, 'Brothers, what should we do?' Kepha answered them, 'Turn from sin, return to Yahweh, and each of you be immersed on the authority of Yahushua HaMashiach into forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Ruach HaKodesh. For the promise is for you, for your children, and for those far away, as many as Yahweh, our sovereign king, may call.' He pressed his case with many other arguments and kept pleading with them, 'Save yourselves from this perverse generation.' So those who accepted what he said were immersed, and there were added to the group that day about 3,000 people. They continued faithfully in the teaching of the emissaries, in fellowship, in breaking bread, and in the prayers. Everyone was filled with awe, and many miracles and signs took place through the emissaries. All those trusting in Yahushua stayed together and had everything in common. In fact, they sold their property and possessions and distributed the proceeds to all who were in need, continuing faithfully and with singleness of purpose to meet in the temple courts daily and breaking bread in their several homes. They shared their food in joy and simplicity of heart, praising Yahweh and having the respect of all the people. And day after day, Yahweh kept adding to them those who were being saved." Something I want to point out is verse 41. 3,000 people were added to the group of followers in Yahushua, and that number just kept growing day by day. It is said that when Moshe returns from Mount Sinai during the 40 days and nights with Yahweh, receiving the 10 statements, instructions from Yahweh for the tabernacle and the covenant, upon Moshe's return with the 2 stones, with the 2 tablets of the 10 statements written by Yahweh, the Hebrews had built themselves an idol and turned back to their old ways, influenced by the world they lived within Egypt. It is said that Yahweh struck the people with a plague, the Hebrews, who were all in one mind to build a golden calf. Yahweh struck those people with a plague. You can reference that in Shavuot chapter 32, verse 35. Shavuot chapter 32, verse 35, you can reference that. This plague was the consequence of going back to being wicked, impure, defiling what Yahweh created and intended the life of mankind to be. And the number of people to have been affected by this is known to be 3,000. Meaning, during the first Shavuot, the first day Moshe went to see Yahweh on Mount Sinai and was given the 10 statements or commandments, Moshe was there for 40 days and 40 nights. And people grew desperate and their faith became weak. So they built a golden calf during Moshe's absence. However, Yahushua dwelt and fellowshiped amongst his people after his resurrection for 40 days. This shows that if you depend your entire life on Yahweh, His Ruach will be there to strengthen you, equip you, teach you, correct you, and show you the way. Christians like to say that there are only 2 commandments. 2 commandments throughout the whole entire scriptures. You can reference this either in the book of Matthew chapter 22 or in the book of Mark chapter 12. So the reference Christians like to say that there are only 2 commandments, you can reference in Matthew chapter 22 or Mark chapter 12. And those 2 is what Yahushua states is, it is to love Yahweh with all your heart, your soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. However, because the earlier scriptures and writings are often dismissed and categorized as being under the law and not receiving the grace of Yahweh, many people are perishing due to the twisting of Yahweh's words and scriptures and lack of knowledge. If you read later on Matthew 22 and Mark 12, you will see the full context. Many people are unfortunately picking and choosing what is to be valid for today. But we are going to warn you that it is important to not follow religion or mankind, only Yahweh. Hear His words, not mankind. This is why I provide references and encourage you to write them down, because even what we say, you should be confirming with Yahweh. So the 2 stones Yahweh had written the 10 statements on, you can reference that in the book of Shavuot, chapter 32 to chapter 34. So in the book of Shavuot, chapter 32 to chapter 34, you can reference the entire context when the 10 statements were given and the golden calf was being built and the plague that occurred. But what you need to know is that those 2 stones Moshe brought with him to present to the Hebrews represent those 2 commandments that Yahushua stated in Matthew and in Mark. So the first 5 commandments or statements from Yahweh summarize how we should live and show you how to love Yahweh. The first 5 statements Yahweh gave Moshe, the first tablet is a summary of how you are to live and show how you love Yahweh. The second and last portion of the 10 statements given by Yahweh show you how to live in peace with your neighbors, loving them as you would yourself. The Feast of Shavuot is when Yahweh blessed us with his 10 statements in connection to him uttering 10 statements during the days of creation. And Yahweh is to be received in both spirit and truth. You can reference that statement in John 4, in the book of John chapter 4. And it's interesting to note that the days of creation were 7 days, and there are 7 weeks leading up to the Feast of Shavuot. Hence, why in the days of Yahushua, the Feast of Shavuot following him being raised, his Ruach, his breath, spirit, and wind, was given to the people to share the message of Yahweh in all the earth. Those who receive him will receive all the promises Yahweh has for them. Those who do not will perish. So as you prepare and learn more from Yahweh about the Feast of Shavuot and the period of waiting for what's to come, what you are to do, the calling and purpose he has laid out for you, which, by the way, is first and foremost to share the message of Yahweh through Yahushua. That is all of his children's purpose and calling in life, first and foremost. So how you will receive it? Are you going to be the reason why Yahweh has to withhold and delay such blessings and transformation in your life? Or are you going to be ready and show that you are committed in following him in all of his ways with his help, not by your own efforts or by the help of mankind, but through communing with him and believing in him and his children having fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Yahweh? Remember, if it took 7 weeks for the Hebrews to experience the outcome from being slaves to experiencing freedom in Yahweh, and it took 7 weeks for the followers of Yahushua to receive Ruach Yahweh in doing a massive work for his kingdom, what do you think Yahweh has in mind and in store for you to experience and receive these next few weeks leading up to the Feast of Shavuot? So just as a reminder, June 11th to the 13th is the date of the Feast of Shavuot we are to observe. Shema, or the book of Exodus, chapter 23, is where you will learn more about the first mention of this feast. In Mattityahu, or Jeremiah, chapter 31, verses 30 to 49, that is where you will receive more spiritual understanding in a different context. And in the book of Acts, chapter 1 and chapter 2, this is where you will gain wisdom in connecting the truth in Yahweh's messages throughout Scripture. Let's close now in prayer. And if there are any questions or anything anyone has to say, prayer requests afterwards, we encourage you to speak, as we will unmute you after we pray. So, Yahweh, we bless your sovereign and righteous name. Thank you for allowing us to become new creations in you. Thank you for receiving us into your kingdom and family forever. May the statements you spoke be written on our hearts. May our entire lives become renewed in your seed that is full of life. Ruach Yahweh, help us in preparation for the Feast of Shavuot. Show us what we need to leave in the past, apply in our lives each and every day, and how we are to apply and show our faith, hope, and love for you. May we do this all in you, Yahweh, and with you, to give you glory, honor, and praise. So shall this all be in Yahushua HaMashiach.
So shall it be.